Hello, folks. Starting to watch it build up. Hi, Stephen and Morgan and Janine, Jason, Maurice, Marla, Patricia, Carlos. It doesn't let me see all the way down to the bottom of the list. I hope everybody is doing well today. Here we go. Lizette and Jarko. Welcome, guys. We're going to wait a couple more minutes and see if we get anybody else in the class. As you know, today, Carlos is going to be doing survival of death and the development of parapsychology. Welcome, Brian, Esther, and Chrissy. Hey, y'all. And remember to say hello to each other and let me know where you are, what the weather's like outside your window, what time of day it is. Anything else you want to say? I won't ask you this forever, just in the first few sessions. Welcome, Martin and Adelson. Antonio. I wanted to mention before we get started that yesterday's opening session is in bright and sunny New York, Idaho. Hold on a second, let me go back over here. I wanted to mention that if you go to live class, using those 3 bars on the left to navigate over there, on the past tab, you will find the recording for yesterday's session. Today's session should be on that past list within 24 hours at least. If not, no snow flurries. That's good news. Sunny New York. How's that Edmonton this morning, Morgan? Oh, sunny finally. Great. What's the temp like? Let's see where everybody is. We've got Finland in the house. We've got Canada in the house. Antonio, where are you from? We have the Netherlands in the house and the USA. Where else? Very nice, very nice. Okay, well, I'm going to get started in just a second here. There was something else that I meant to mention. Oh, the MP4 of yesterday's session will also be up in the schedule this afternoon. If any of you had any difficulties yesterday, whoa, Quebec. Yay. We've got both sides of Canada represented, and we've got Antonio's living in Spain, but from Brazil. We're in Brazil. We have good friends in Juiz de Fora and Sao Paulo and Curitiba. Rio. That's a place that I've never been before. That's it. That's wonderful. Okay, so I think I distracted myself again. Oh, I wanted to ask, in looking at the recording of yesterday's session, although Carlos and I did not notice any kind of, kind of flame out of the course where everything went black and then came back again. It was there in the recording. I'm not quite sure who WizIQ uses to produce the recording, but I wanted to know if any of you noticed that during the session. What happens is it just kind of goes right back to that countdown page for a few seconds and then comes back in. We didn't see it live either. Okay, well, that makes me feel better because I was like, oh my God, what happened? There was nothing that I saw over here. So I'm going to do a tiny bit of editing on the MP4 to get out those bits, and then the MP4 will be up. And I'm also, once I'm done with that, I'm going to be working on finishing up Jessica Utz's presentation on statistics from the 28 ParaMOOC, and that should be up live on the Parapsychology Foundation ParaMOOC playlist later today. So we're moving right along. Let's see if there's anybody else on my list that I didn't say hello to. Yes, welcome Phoebe, welcome C, welcome Bruno. Carlos, I'm going to give you your tools right after I do the introduction. So don't worry, I'm going to get there. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to start out with the introduction for the video, basically. So welcome again to ParaMOOC 2019. Today is our second live session. As you know, the course opened on March 21st and will close for enrollment on May 31st. If you're enrolled by then, as all of you guys are, you'll have access to all of the materials in the course until probably April of 2020, and maybe a little bit longer, we'll see. The course is called Parapsychology Research and Education, Survival of Death and Parapsychology, and we have 10 individuals who will be giving us lectures over the duration of the course. Before we get started, I'd like to give a shout out to Radiant Skies, the artist on 123rf.com, from whom we licensed our course logo, which we really love. I would like to give a shout out also to Lizette Coley, the president of the Parapsychology Foundation, for supporting the work of the ParaMOOC. Without her, this would be a shorter course even. And I'd like to say thank you in advance to Brian Williams of the Psychical Research Foundation, who is our discussion forum co-moderator and is a font of knowledge in the chat box. So if you have any questions, that's you can direct them to him, and he will always pop up with links and things like that when necessary. Steve, I see your comment that you had that it froze at the end. We noticed that as well over here, but didn't see the blackouts. I'm so glad everybody else didn't see them either. So that just means it was sitting in the whoever recorded it was on their side. They were losing their signal. So first, before we get started, I want to apologize about the fuzziness of some of these pictures. They're really kind of small, and when I opened them up for these slides, they got quite fuzzier, and they're even fuzzier in the recording. I'm going to go on a search and see if I can find some other pictures for everybody, although I really like this one of Carlos, I must say. So today's presentation is by Dr. Carlos S. Alvarado. It's called Survival of Death and the Development of Parapsychology. Dr. Alvarado, or himself, as he's known around here, has a PhD in psychology from the University of Edinburgh. His work has centered on survey research, out-of-body experiences, and other psychic experiences mainly, and the history of psychical research. He's a research fellow at the Parapsychology Foundation and adjunct research faculty at Sophia University. He's also one of the more frequent authors of entries in the Society for Psychical Research's Psi Encyclopedia. He is on the editorial boards of the Journal of Near-Death Studies. Oh, sorry about the typo. I did this quickly this morning. The Journal of Near-Death Studies and the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. He's also an associate editor of the Journal of Scientific Exploration and the book review editor of the Journal of Parapsychology. In 2010, he was the recipient of the Parapsychological Association's Outstanding Contribution Award, and in 2017 of the PA's Outstanding Career Award. So I'm going to move over to Carlos's slideshow and get his technology up here so we can bring him on and give him the floor. Okay, Carlos, you should be able to show your video. I'm not seeing it. You may need to click on the video above. Okay, hold on 2 seconds, guys. I'm going to vacate my space. You can enjoy my desk, and I'm going to go see what the problem is over there. I think we probably needed to fiddle with his webcam before we got started, and I forgot to do that. So hold on a second and talk to yourself. To yourselves. Have a conversation. I'll be right back. Actually, that was a good teaching moment because I just saw the system, the way the system handles accepting the controls when you're a speaker, which was something I hadn't seen before. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Carlos, and I'll get out of your way. Carlos, you want to say something? So yes, we can hear you.
You hear me?
Yes. Okay. I'm getting
Loud and clear.
Have at it.
All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Today my talk will be mainly historical, which I think is appropriate at the beginning of almost any topic. I'm going to be talking about survival of death and the development of parapsychology. The whole idea of this talk is how the concept of survival of death, it has affected the actual development of parapsychology, even in ways that are not directly relevant to survival, just to show how important survival has been in the history of this field. Some of it is kind of self-evident, but there are many other things that are not that well known. As you know, when we're talking about survival of death, in psychical research, we mean the investigation of phenomena that seem to suggest that consciousness or personality, or whatever you want to define it, survives the death of the physical body. And these are phenomena such as apparitions, mediumship, near-death experiences, hauntings, reincarnation cases, and many other phenomena. You will hear about a lot of these phenomena later on in the other lectures. So let me start with the basic concept of this talk, which is that science is affected not only by the research that we know do, but by overarching concepts and overarching ideas that guide our interests and guide our assumptions when we do research. What you see here in this slide is in the case of ancient science, the ideas of Aristotle in terms of astronomy were very influential. He had all these concepts about perfection and the whole idea of spheres and circles, and that was projected into a framework, a cosmological framework that he used to suggest how the planets were placed in the universe and how things kind of work. This idea was extremely influential through the Middle Ages and even later. And it's a very good example of how certain concepts shape how we see reality and how we study. Later on, we have this concept of the mechanical philosophy, particularly important in the 17th century in Europe, where the mechanical philosophy was the whole idea that matter work in terms of very mechanical terms, collisions of particles, things that will push one thing and cause an effect on the other side, and so forth. Those assumptions were also extremely important in developing all kinds of concepts in 17th century science. And we see it in the work of Newton, Galileo, the work of Robert Boyle. The slide at the extreme right shows the instruments that Robert Boyle used to study a vacuum, how a vacuum could be created, and the things that a vacuum use. And certainly, religion, as you may have guessed, is a big overarching concept that has affected science in many, many different ways. There is a whole area in the history of science that is devoted to the study of the interactions between the religious ideas and religion in general and the practice of science. Traditionally, was seen, uh, especially from the 19th century, that religion retarded the growth of science and religion hindered science. That idea is no longer held by a lot of historians. All that has been revised, and there has been a lot of studies suggesting that religious concepts and ideas many times help the development of science or interacted in ways that were much. But again, that's another example of overarching idea. The ones you see here are more specific concepts that also shape a lot of the interpretation phenomena. The left, or in Hippocratic humors, that's the idea, talking about 400 years BC, of the humors, which were these particular forces in the body that were believed to cause disease if they were out of balance. That concept was shared in later centuries, and certainly is not accepted today. But at the time, all medical thought was shaped following that, and this came out up to the Middle Ages, and slightly later as well. The concept of the ether, for example, affected very much the development of science, and there were many interesting debates about experimentation that were trying to detect the ether. The ether was this supposed medium. It was like a universal force all around, and that's what allowed physical phenomena to happen. So light was believed to be propagated by the ether. The beam of light will hit the ether and was able to move around because it had kind of a substance all around that allowed it. The same for movement and sound and many others. The ether was later forgotten. It comes from ancient times. It was very much involved up to the 19th century. Uh, Today is seems that there are some quarters that are bringing out similar ideas. But regardless of the validity of these ideas or not, the point I'm trying to make is that science is full of these overarching concepts that influence the actual practice of science, the actual observations, and of course the interpretation of phenomena that are seen. There is a whole literature as well, or people call the occult and mystical traditions, things like astrology, like alchemy, magic, the hermetic tradition, that for many years were believed to excuse me, were believed to be not important in the development of science. And in fact, a lot of people will chart the history of science by saying that science was kind of a conquest of all those older beliefs. But a lot of the more recent historiography of science is making a different point, saying that these ideas of magic, of astrology, of alchemy actually help in the development of what we know as science in the 17th century and even later. An example being Isaac Newton, and his work was not only based on observations and ideas, mechanical constructs of energy, but he was also affected in his case by alchemy. People had made the point that the alchemical ideas provided kind of inspiration for Newton to do some of the things that he did. And the same for a lot of many other scientists. You see here, I have a link of a bibliography prepared by Andrea Sommer that has a lot of the more important literature that develops this concept. And again, the idea that I'm discussing today, the concept of survival of death, is very similar to this. It's in the same tradition. How things that conceptually has been thought to be too metaphysical to be part of science are now considered to be extremely important in affecting science in different ways. So what I'm talking is how the concept of survival of death was an important guiding influence in the development of parapsychology as a field. this included, of course, the idea that a lot of the people that have been doing explorations of psychic phenomena, even before the development of formal psychical research in the 19th century, were looking for something that was not material. They were looking for a soul, a mind, a spirit, if you will. Different terms, different concepts, but the idea was kind of the same. That psychic phenomena perhaps we support the whole idea of existence in human beings, something that was non-physical, that transcended the physical limitations. That, of course, is very much part of the idea of survival of death. If we survive bodily death, it's because we have in us a non-physical component. That's the basic argument here. So I'm arguing that survival of death was influential, not only in general, but specifically in two very important moments in the history of parapsychology. Parapsychology, of course, has a lot of important developments, a lot of important periods or moments, as I describe them here. And I'm happy two that are generally recognized as extremely important. One is the development of the Society for Psychical Research, which appeared in London in 1882. And the other was the work that was in London, and the other was the work in the United States of J.B. Rhine and his colleagues at the university that presented an experimental paradigm that redefined aspects of parapsychology. It was carried by the movement of spiritualism. Certainly, the idea of survival comes from ancient times. We don't need spiritualism in the 19th century to realize that. But what spiritualism does is, in a very forceful and pervasive way, as seen in the literature at the time, there's the giving a lot of publicity and discussion about the idea that survival of death was a reality based on a variety of phenomena that came with the movement of spiritualism. Very soon after spiritualism gets founded, basically the character of the medium, an individual that supposedly has the ability to channel spirits and produce phenomena, appears, and the movement becomes extremely strong in the 19th century, and we're talking mainly the United States and Europe. In other places, it was not that strong. Many important journals appear, the things get so widely discussed, and the main tenet, of course, of spiritualism is the whole concept of survival of death. The figure of the medium is very important because that was an empirical way of finding evidence not only for psychic phenomena, according to spiritualism, but also for survival of death. So we have mental mediums producing messages, visions, they hear voices, they produce music, poetry, composers, writers, they get possessed. That's the mental aspect of mediumship. There was also the physical aspect of mediumship, the movement of objects, table levitations, materializations, or the actual physical appearance of whole figures or shapes. The importance of this phenomena is that it reinforces the idea that there is a spiritual agent, that there is someone or something that has survived bodily death. And this is, in their view, physical and empirical evidence for the concept of continuation of consciousness. These are some of the things of the period from the 1850s that were extremely influential in propagating that idea. This is the case of George T. Dexter, was an American physician that became a writing medium. And when he wrote, he said that he brought communications from the spirit of Francis Bacon and from Emmanuel Swedenborg. And what you find here, and as I like to show this slide, because it's probably the first example, or at least one of the early examples of actual publication of written messages that shows how they were different from the normal calligraphy of the medium. As you can see on the top slide, that's Dexter's own handwriting, and the two lower slides show the writing of Swedenborg and the writing of Bacon. And then that was one thing that convinced a lot of people that the writing was so different. Then there was something behind it that was much more than just imagination or the mind of the medium. Of course, that was debatable at the time and even later. Well, it shows what was happening at the time that really sustained the whole idea that survival of death was possible. Spiritualism eventually brings us to the development of the Society for Psychical Research in 1882, which is founded by a group of people. Generally, it's emphasized that it was a group of scientists and scholars, and that is true. But it should also be remembered that some of the actual founders of the society were also spiritualists. There were people that were already convinced about the whole idea of survival, and many of them were practicing spiritualism. You see here a list of individuals. The only one that will apply to that definition will be William Stanton Moses, the last one at the right-hand side, which was in the council of the society early on. And he was a reverend, but he was also a medium, and was a very important leader of spiritualism in, in the UK. Was particularly influential during the 1880s. But there were many other individuals that sat in the council of the SPR, are not that well known, or were very active spiritualists of the time. One example was Hensley Wedgwood, Wedgwood of the family of the Wedgwood China. And he was well known as a philologist in the studies of words and filed dictionaries and the like. He was a cousin of Charles Darwin. He was very well known in British society. He was an active spiritualist founding the SPR that has been kind of forgotten. There were other people like Charles Macy, which was very interested in the religious mystical aspect of spiritualism. He was also on the board of directors of the SPR. So that goes to show you that when the society gets formed, there are all these individuals that are already convinced of survival, and they bring the idea to the society. Of course, one of the tasks of the society was to bring together the previous literature of the subject. So they were very well aware of the spiritualist literature, and even of older literature, the mesmeric literature and literature from things such as apparitions, telepathy, mediumship, and the like. And their big accomplishment is that they bring a degree of systematization that had not been seen before. The phenomena are clearly defined, evidence is controlled, they care for the quality of the evidence for issues such as replication, interpretation, and in doing so, they develop a lot of useful methods for the study of psychical research. And to this day, it's generally acknowledged that the society really shaped the course of what we now call parapsychology. Some of their early work is this book, Phantasms of the Living, published in 1886 by Edmund Gurney, Frederick Myers, and Frank Putnam. Edmund Gurney was the main author. And the idea is that there are these ESP impressions that people receive, sometimes in the form of apparitions. They see figures, and a lot of these things happen close to death, as you can see in this next slide. They classify those experiences mainly of the visual type. And by the visual type, I mean you see the face of someone on a wall, or you see a human figure walking into the room, and sometimes there are tactile and auditory impressions, but the most common one was the visual, which is something that has been shown in other studies. The visual sense is the most frequent one in a lot of these experiences, not the only one. They classify a lot of these experiences in ways that you see in the slide. Uh, Crisis apparitions was one of the main ones, one of the more frequent ones. That's where you will see the figure of someone that was having a crisis at a distant place. So if you will see, let's say, the appearance of a friend of yours, that you find later that that person had an accident at that exact moment, and you are perceiving it at that same moment, or the person was close to death for whatever reason, an accident or natural causes like disease, something of that sort. And but that's what it was referred as a crisis. There were apparitions, what I call here apparitions just before death. Those are a few cases that they found of people that were quite well, or their apparitions were seen by someone else. And soon after that person, the person that was seen as an apparition died. So it seemed to indicate it was like it was announcing. They're not very frequent in the collection, these cases, but there are some of them. They're experimental apparitions, people that will themselves to appear to others at a distance, and they were seen at a distance. Someone, will sit quietly in the room and will think, "Oh, I'm going to visit Miss X, a friend of theirs, and let's see if she will see or hear me." And later on, they contact the person will go and will contact the friend, and the friend will say, "I was surprised to hear your voice last night at this time period, or I saw an image of you, and what's happening? Well, what were you doing?" It seems that the intention of that distant person caused the apparition to appear. That's why they're called experimental. These are fascinating cases, and it's one of these phenomena that really needs to be studied further. But it doesn't seem to be so easy to produce. Not everyone can will the apparition to appear. And of course, there is also the aspect that you also need a sensitive person on the other side. And not everyone is that sensitive to be able to see these things, or at least that was the argument at the time. There were reciprocal apparitions. That was a term that they used to refer to like the idea that you're having something like an out-of-body experience. You visit a place, and over there, someone in that same location will see you. Later, you wake up in your body, and you remember having traveled, and the person in that location remembers having seen you. That's what they call reciprocal apparitions. Again, there were not many cases, that sort, but they're also fascinating. And then arrival apparitions, which are in the tradition of many places, are those cases where you feel that someone has come into the house, and you assume, oh, he just came out from work. And you hear the sounds, or sometimes even see the person, and then you see them arrive 10 minutes later. And when you ask, well, what were you doing? I thought you were here 10 minutes ago. And the person will say, no, I was on my way, and I was thinking about getting home and all that, but this is the first time I opened the door and that I come kind of inside. So these are cases in which the person is seen to arrive at a place before they actually get there. And the cases again are fascinating. When you put all this collection of cases together, they they are very very compelling and very impressive because many of them have very good evidence from the testimony that something was really going on. And again, the interpretation of the SPR people, some of them believe that they were explained by telepathy, but in any case, most of the SPR researchers tended to think that whatever was happening was some type of non-physical process. From the claims of spiritualism. The same, the systematic study of mediumship. But to their credit, the SPR people conducted some of the first really systematic studies of mediumship. And these were done with Leonora Piper. See her photo there. She was an American medium that was investigated by the society. She traveled from Boston to England and was systematically studied by the people that you see here. Both William James and James Islop, pictured here on the left, were from the United States. But in England, it was mainly Oliver Lodge and Myers and a few others that focused on the study of Mrs. Piper. The whole idea was she will fall in trance and either will speak and claim to bring information from spirits, or she will write and answer messages through writing. In 1889, they bring Mrs. Piper to England, and she stays at Oliver Lodge's, and there they follow a lot of procedures to systematically study Mrs. Piper's mediumship. So, they examine the medium's correspondence. They take care that she cannot hear or see anything. They bring unknown people to sit with her in seances and so forth. And they find very good results. Some of them, like Oliver Lodge was one of the main ones, believe that the best way to explain it was spirit communication. Again, we have here systematic studies of mediumship because of the survival issue and affected by the then current movement of spiritualism. Of course, theoretically speaking, the work of Frederick Myers in the context of the society is something that is even today, and actually even more today than in those days, is acknowledged to be of extreme importance not only for psychical research, but also for psychology. He publishes in 1903 this book that you see here, Human Personality and the Survival of Bodily Death. And basically what he does is he brings a lot of the facts of psychology to study the possibility of survival of bodily death. He postulates the existence of a subliminal self, basically a subconscious self, that he believed was spiritual in nature, was not affected by evolution, or interacted with the physical body, and it was related in the production of phenomena that you see here from more conventional psychological topics such as creativity and dreams to less conventional telepathy, mediumship, clairvoyance, premonitions, and other phenomena of that sort. But again, the whole idea is that he developed this system, which is a very interesting blend of psychology of the subconscious or of the subliminal and parapsychological phenomena having a spiritual component in the middle. And again, that was a very influential framework that guided the work of the society for generations, and it has been more rediscovered recently, and a lot of people are now talking much more about his ideas and trying to extend them, relating them to more current developments in psychology. But again, it was an example of how within this society, the idea of survival was really guiding a lot of what they were doing. Because of all these developments, the SPR researchers are able to present a lot of different methods of study, and actually develop these methods of study, experiments. And you see in the proceedings of the society reports of experiments, theory, different types of case reports, methodological reviews, the type of thing that you will see more often later years in psychology. But that by the end of the first period of the society, between 1882 and 1900, they really chart the field in a very general way, and not only conceptually but methodologically speaking, they give order to the field of psychical research. Not necessarily solving any of the major problems, but at least making it a more systematic research venture. And the idea of survival was very much behind that and was a guiding concept. Shifting from the SPR, we come to the United States and see the work of J.B. Rhine, Joseph Banks Rhine, and his associates at Duke University. We need to remember that when we talk about this, it's not only the work of a single individual, it's not only J.B. Rhine, there are other people that were involved with him. And in this photo here, you see a lot of the early persons that worked with him. There was J.G. Pratt, there was Loisa Rhine, there was J.B.'s wife, but also a collaborator. You know, they worked together in a lot of different projects. Anyhow, this is a very important moment in parapsychology. In 1934, J.B. Rhine publishes his classic monograph, Extrasensory Perception, in which he reports of many EXP experiments conducted and Duke. That J.B. Rhine was, in a way, redefining parapsychology, not redefining it in a completely original way. What he's doing had been done before in the 19th century and in the 1920s. But particularly in the United States, it was very influential in making an experimental research program of studying psychic phenomena in the laboratory. And here are some of the things that he accomplished. He basically reduced the field to ESP and PK. PK is psychokinesis, mind over matter effects. You know, people that will sit in front of dice and try to affect the flow of dice to study it. And what they did was that they clearly defined what they were expecting. They used statistical methods to measure statistical techniques, excuse me, to measure the results. And they temporarily abandoned the survival problem. However, the point that I'm making is that when you see this and you see at these photos, you say, but what does that has to do with survival? Well, in a way, nothing, but the point I'm making is that the development of this research program was very much affected by J.B. and Loisa Rhine's involvement with the whole idea of the study of survival of death via mediumship. We found early on that that J.B. and Loisa Rhine had in 1926 a seance with the famous medium Marjorie, whose name was Mina Stinson Crandon. She was mainly a physical medium using materialization phenomena, and you see some photographs here of materialization. But she also produced mental mediumship, some type of communication. She was extremely controversial. There were a lot of discussions about her mediumship. In 1926, the Rhines have a seance with her, and they are convinced on what they saw that the medium was fraudulent. So this experience basically turns them off to the topic of physical mediumship. But they continue their explorations and they get much better results with mental mediums. In 1926, we see them having a seance with Mrs. Chenoweth, which was the pseudonym of Minnie Soul. It was a medium that was studied in the United States by James Hislop, an American philosopher and psychical researcher at the American Society for Psychical Research. By this time, Hislop had died. He died in 1920. But they are impressed by the results they start to get. They associate themselves with a man named John Thomas, which was a superintendent of schools that was studying mediumship, and he actually ended getting a PhD degree from the university by presenting a doctoral thesis based on the story of mediumship. Early on, he hired and he paid J.B. and Loaiza for help in analyzing and organizing all this information that he was getting from mediums such as Mrs. Soul, but also Eileen Garrett and Gladys Osborne Leonard. You see a photo of Mrs. Leonard here. These were both Garrett and Leonard were well-known mediums at the time and had been tested by a lot of people and had a reputation of producing good results. And the results were kind of good, but at the same time, they bring in the Rhines the idea or the question of how do you control for this phenomenon? How a lot of these science records, some of them are quite ambiguous, and we're not never sure of the source of the information. If it's not ambiguous, could it be that it's telepathy from the seeker? Could there be explanations of that sort? Those ideas start working in their mind. And they thought that the survival problem was extremely important, but by 1934, in his book Extrasensory Perception, Ryan had already decided that the survival idea, although very important, was too complex to be able to handle in an adequate way by the current methodology. So what he decides is, well, we need to stop there, put survival on the side, forget about it directly for now, and just try to see if we can learn much more about ESP. ESP from the living, if we can learn more about how it works, about the limits of ESP, then we may be able to determine later what comes from a living source and what comes from a deceased spirit. That was the basic idea, and that's what starts JB Rhine's whole research program that develops during the 1930s and 1940s, particularly. Through the years, Rhine kept writing about survival, and as you can see here in articles that I listed some of them down here, articles published in the Journal of Parapsychology. He keeps writing in 1943, 1956, 1960, 1974. He keeps returning to the problem of survival, always recognizing the great importance of it, but not knowing still, what to do with it. And had a really deep impact in the research program, but in a different way that basically led him to do something different. Right? I'll come back to that. So we come to the SPR, and we find that what happens here is that the SPR inherited an agenda from spiritualism, especially from spiritualist interest in mediumship and in apparitions. And of course, behind that, the whole idea of survival of death. So the SPR found a lot of inspiration about what to do and what were the important issues from the movement of spiritualism that had as its basic tenets survival of death. When it comes to the studies of J.B. Rhine, it is not exactly the same thing. What we find is that the survival idea led to ESP studies. So what we see is kind of a contrary reaction. It's like, because survival was so complex, we cannot deal with it now. Let's do something else. Let's do something different. So you still have survival affecting the ideas and the actual work and the thinking behind Rhine's all experimental program, but it's not in the same positive way that we see with the SPR people. So what we see is a reaction to what for Rhine was a lack of precision in mediumship studies and ambiguity about the source of information. Here you have two different models of influence. One, a contrary reaction, but that leads to something very important that affected the development of modern parapsychology, coming from survival. And in the case of the SPR, more the adoption of similar ideas of the spiritualists and the phenomena and attempts to study the phenomena more directly. So these two moments in the history of the field are affected very much by interest in survival, but they are affected in different ways. And I think there are many moments in history when you find that there are things that influence others, but they don't influence them in a direct way. Sometimes people take a whole different course, but the actual initial impulse, the actual initial reason was because this factor affected the context in which they were thinking and affected their ideas and their priorities. And I think that's what we have here in the case of Rhine and the studies. Of course, people tend to forget that the origin of Rhine's interest in the field was mainly through mediumship and through survival. And I think it's very important to remember that, to be accurate in terms of historical terms. So what we see here is not in a way that, as some people sometimes like to see, that the more scientific control weighs won over more metaphysical ideas of survival. I would say that we need to modify that view and basically say that this more hard science approach existed and came because the survival context was there and was influential. And again, that's another way in which effects or ideas in the history of science sometimes work. I'm about to finish. I want to keep this short because there's so many things that could be said. But one important thing to say is that there were many other factors, and this has to be recognized in the development of both the SPR and of Rhine's experimental program. So many other factors other than survival, concept of survival of death. As you can see here in this illustration, there is this slide about the causes of the scientific revolution. This is a slide that I stole from someone else's presentation. I give the source here. And they're talking about the causes of the scientific revolution. And As you can see, there are many different causes. When historians are asked, what was the cause of the Second World War? It's the same. You have a lot of different concepts dealing with social events, dealing with the economy, dealing with political factors, and so forth. The basic idea is that history cannot be seen to be a simplistic one cause and one effect. We're talking about multiple factors interacting, and it's very difficult, if ever possible, to determine or to say what are what was more important than this factor than the other. So in the case of the SPR, in addition to the guiding concept of survival, we have to see that at the time the SPR was found, there was a lot of interest in mental dissociation, about the unconscious mind. There were many debates about the development of materialistic concepts because of the developments in neurology and psychology at the time. All those things affected also the development of the early Society for Psychical Research. If we see Rhine's experimental program, we see also that happening in an American university in the late 1920s and especially in the 1930s, we see that Rhine's program coexisted with many trends in the development of psychology and statistical approaches in American universities at that time. In 1930, in all kinds of studies in psychology, psychology as a discipline has been developed much more than when it had started in the 19th century. All those things affected how the experimental program came to be. So it's not only the idea of survival. All these things kind of had to be seen in an interaction. So this is kind of a qualifying what I said before. Nonetheless, of course, survival I think was a very important and one of the central causes. Of course, survival has continued, and in recent times we have a lot of studies of near-death experiences, reincarnation, and the like. That will be the topic of the other presentations that you are going to see during the next days. But this basically ends what I wanted to say. I have a selected bibliography here, and I again would like to conclude by emphasizing the complexity of this thing. The way I presented it may sound that it's very simple, but as I said in this slide I just showed, there are multiple factors that affect the field. The important thing is to remember that something like the idea of survival has had a tremendous impact, big impact in the development of parapsychology, and as such, it should not be forgotten. I think there are many people in the field today that want to separate the field from those origins. In fact, some people talk about the problematic metaphysical connections that parapsychology had when it was developing. Well, they may be problematic because for particular people, those things are embarrassing, or some people believe those are not scientific concepts. But what I'm arguing is that that's the way science develops. You just cannot bring and say what is respectable or not. Well, we are dealing with a whole conglomerate of factors, and we have to acknowledge that even if you don't like it, there are certain things like survival that were extremely important in shaping the field. Just as people sometimes take offense when they hear that Isaac Newton was affected by alchemy. I was reading, alchemical writings, and that a lot of the 7th century scientists were affected by mystical ideas about the universe, about how the world work. And sometimes they were just, very general concepts, but they were there in the intellectual work of the scientists. And in recent times, by recent times, I mean the last 30, 40 years, historians of science have been developing that argument that all those metaphysical occult traditions have been very important in the development of science, even the hard physics approach. It's just that we're so separated now from the origins that we forget and we demarcate these things when we should be, I think, more open to historical influences. So I should stop now. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. That's really good. I really love that one of the things that you've done here is to show the complexity of the origins of the field and how much early researchers were focused on this issue, and how long it's lasted in the field. And I certainly agree that we need to keep mindful and unafraid of our origins, because there's always something to be learned by going back and looking at the history of a particular science. Everybody is saying wonderful things, fascinating, and lots of thank yous and virtual applause as well. So if you have any questions, guys, now's the time. Janine just gave us a link to DOPS on reincarnation. We don't actually have a talk. Oh, yes, we do. We have Dr. Okada will be talking about reincarnation today. Not today, in this course.
Well, the research of Dobbs is at the University of Virginia. They have a unit there that was founded by Ian Stevenson originally. And they're one of the places that are the leaders in the study of phenomena that we will be discussing in the coming lectures. Reincarnation, death of visions, and things of that sort. That certainly, it's very much present in modern parapsychology, even though I think the majority of parapsychologists follow an experimental approach. There is still very important studies conducted with experiences and with the whole idea of survival, and this place, it represents that very well. They have, many publications. If you go to their website, you'll find not only the books they have published, but they have access to PDF files of a lot of the research that they have published in academic journals, some of which may be a little hard to obtain, but you can access them right there in their site.
Yeah, they did a recent update of their website, and for each one of the staff members, there are quite a lot of pages of PDFs of articles and book chapters that are available to anybody that goes to that goes to the website. So if you haven't taken a look at the DOPS website in a while, I think it's a good idea to go and take a look. Because there's not only do they list all of their books, and there's some very important ones there, but they also have this called
this book here it expresses very well the research program of the University of Virginia group. This is a book put together by David Presti, which works with the Virginia group, and it basically came out from Columbia University Press, and it has chapters on reincarnation, apparitions, and all the phenomena that they study, and with the rationale, like why is this important? Why we need to study this phenomena in order to get the idea that the materialistic position is not necessarily correct one. Having said that, this is still a very controversial thing. A lot of people are skeptical about the reality of survival and the like. that's up to you to decide. You need to get into the evidence and study it. I personally think that a lot of the evidence is very good, and that we really need to reevaluate a lot of the positions of classical science. But I like to make the point, in fairness to the current state of the situation, that these things are still very much controversial, even inside parapsychology. There are still people inside the field that consider that some of the evidence is not convincing, that it can be explained in other ways, such as ESP, from the living, or other psychological mechanisms, depending on this phenomenon. It's a fascinating field, and it really brings together, I think, a lot of the knowledge of psychology.
Steve asked, as an empath, is this more of a mental mediumship area, the ability to pick up on other people's emotions?
So, sorry, what was that?
As an empath, is this more of a mental mediumship area to pick up on other people's emotions?
Well, it could be interpreted like that. I mean, you could say that you're talking about telepathy and not necessarily is mediumship. Or there are mediums that have empathic abilities, and what they're saying is that on occasion they think that it's telepathy between the living, but other times there are other processes involving discarnate agency. So it could be interpreted in it. All of these phenomena can be related to mediumship and the survival idea. It just depends on your theoretical approach and what processes, what aspects you want to emphasize. But yeah, it could be related.
Morgan was mentioning, let me go back up to her comment, that she did a podcast interview recently where the hosts were trying to argue that the spiritual side to all of this does not belong in science and has no place in science. And she said that was such a frustrating interview.
Yeah, a lot of people believe that, and they basically want to exercise all this stuff from science. I think that's what the Virginia group is trying to do. Is just the opposite. What they're saying is kind of turn the tables and basically say tools of science can be used to study anything. And that includes spiritual experiences that appear to us. We don't understand them. They look marvelous. They look great. Let's approach them. Let's study them, and let's decide on the basis of careful study if we can say they can be explained in some conventional way or not. A lot of people in the field believe that a lot of the cases, like the reincarnation type cases and mediumship, are very difficult to explain by anything other than concept of survival. Again, this comes to the difficulties of dealing with the evidence of survival, and we are going to see that in some of the presentations, and particularly in the closing presentation by Steve Browley. He's a philosopher that has specialized in analyzing all the conceptual issues behind survival of death and the study of the phenomena, and he's going to talk about some of those issues, including some things that are not very convincing to him. He feels that there's some type of evidence that is not as convincing as people claim it is. But I certainly feel that we should not close the doors to the idea of non-physicality or spirituality or any of those concepts. I think it's an issue of seeing does the evidence really support that or not. I go back to the work of the people at the University of Virginia, You see a book they produced. Edward Kelly was the main author, but there are many other authors. There's Emily Kelly, Bruce Grayson, Alan Crabtree. I forget that there are other people involved. Michael Grosso.
Yeah.
They produced this big book called Irreducible Mind. And basically, what they're trying to argue is that not only parapsychology, but if you go to the literature of research, say on memory and other aspects of neurophysiology and psychology, they say that they believe that there are things that cannot be explained by the current uh, concepts, which are basically neurological materialistic. So they're trying to make the point that it's not only parapsychological psychology, like memory, where does memory get stored? How does memory works? They argue that a lot of those things that are assumed by conventional scientists to be explained by materialistic means, they argue that they're not that well established. And they question that. And then they bring the parapsychological material like reincarnation cases and mediumship and other things. And that's why they call the book Irreducible Mind. They say, yeah, there is a mind that cannot be reduced to, to a lot of these ideas of psychology and neurology. So there are ways, I think, of arguing about it, and certainly I think we need to keep including the spiritual as long as we keep the discussion in a rational and empirical way, and not just accept things on the basis of faith, because then you are not doing science, you're doing something else, which is also valid. You are free to analyze a thing in any way you want, including your own impressions. But if you want to be scientific, there are specific ways of dealing with it.
Patrick is saying, have any researchers approached the issue exploring what the concept of non-physicality might be, how it might be better understood, or if it's reasonable to believe that it can be better understood?
There are people that have tried to analyze, the concept of non-physicality, and it's really very, very difficult to do because science doesn't have a lot of the tools that I think that are needed. If you accept that there is this different realm that exists, how do we deal with it? It cannot be measured, it cannot be photographed, it cannot be touched. You have to deal with it in indirect ways. But on the other hand, a lot of psychology deals with things in indirect ways, like the study of dreams, for example. You get accounts of dreams, and of course, you can make certain psychophysiological measurements, but a lot of it, is going around the phenomenon, not really being able to manipulate it completely. So it is very difficult to define what non-physicality means. And one of the problems we have had is that I think that there is a lot of use of the concept, but without knowing what we are dealing with. And I think that's exactly the point. We don't know what it is. I think we believe or we know that there is something there, and we know some of the properties, some of the way it manifests, but we don't know enough to really do very precise studies. Still, I think a lot of the evidence, when you put it together, it shows that there is something there that we still don't know how to define. So yeah, there is a need to go back to that concept and try to refine it. And I think in the last big production of the UVA group is this other book that I'm looking at it in my shelf. I think it's called Beyond Physicalism. I forget that the title
Beyond
right
Physicalism.
now. Beyond Physicalism, and it's again a collection of essays by a few of them, and they're trying to get a little more into these ideas of what are we dealing with? How can we define this transcendental realm? Can we define non-physicality? I don't know if they were completely successful, but I think they make a case of at least how complex it is and present some possible ways of understanding the idea better. Well, I agree. That's a very important thing, and more needs to be done. We cannot be happy just from saying, "Oh, yeah, this is non-physical," and just leave it like that, or saying, "Oh, yeah, this is the power of the spirit." Okay, but we need to know more. For centuries, we have known about mediumship from ancient times to now, but we know very little of how mediumship actually works. If there is really a spirit affecting a physical body and transmitting messages, we need to know more of that interaction between that spirit and that physical body in producing the writing, the verbal statement, the images that the medium comes out with. That needs to be better understood. Granted, we don't understand a lot of similar process in conventional psychology, the production of dreams, the production of mental imagery, and just saying, oh, yeah, the brain is involved, or we have ideas, concepts, we still don't understand that completely. But it's the same thing in mediumship. We cannot be completely happy with just saying, yeah, it's a spirit and it interacts. Okay, but the purpose of science is to try to find out more details. It could be that it will take us much longer to understand it. We're dealing with the whole mind-body problem, which is the original quest in psychology. And there is still so much to do, not only conceptually, but in an empirical way. I should stop now because it can get more and more complicated.
Antonio was asking, in terms of the field, do most parapsychologists believe in survival or super psi?
That's hard to say. I used to think that most parapsychologists believe more in super psi. Super psi being the idea that that all the evidence coming from mediums, psychic powers of the living, and it's called super. First term was super ESP, and now we use super psi to include from psi phenomena to include also the possibility of psychokinesis and many other processes. From the very beginning of psychical research, and you see that within the SPR, not all the SPR researchers were convinced that Mrs. Piper was channeling spirits. Some of them said, no, it's telepathy. A case in point was Frank Putnam, that I didn't mention because, there's so many people to cover. But Putnam always just stay with telepathy, and he said, that's good enough for me. Thank you very much. We don't need to go to the spirit hypothesis. I used to think that most parapsychologists believe that, and I think a lot of them are like that. But I think in recent years, a lot of people have been coming out of the closet, so to speak, and they at least seem to be more open. So I just really cannot quantify things. But I will say I think a good proportion of parapsychologists still believe that ESP from the living can account for a lot of the things. And actually, that's not unreasonable. I think there are many examples of phenomena that those are reasonable explanations. Just because a medium will say something or will come with something that is true or veridical, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a discarnate source behind it. There are always in other possibilities of interpretation. So again, and I think we have to go case by case and make a decision.
Yeah, Patrick is saying, I suppose when there are difficulties with defining non-physicality, it's going to be difficult to deal with a distinction between survival and super psi.
Yeah, that's always always a problem. And it's kind of a subjective way, you know. We still have people trying to present very specific arguments why one position is better than the other. And I think these are good issues to bring to Steve Browdy, the closing lecture, because he's going to deal with things like that. And I think that there are times where he will tell you telepathy is a better explanation here than in the other, but you know, he goes back and forth, and it depends also on the type of evidence. And not all cases are equal. You know, there are some mediumship cases that are much more precise and impressive than others produced by other mediums. So that you also have to consider that. But yes, certainly, it is a difficult and subjective thing, which again is typical in science. There are many concepts in science, many theoretical models that are controversial, that people argue one way or the other, and different schools of thought get formed, and controversies take place all the time uh, around the same phenomenon. Well, that's part of the how hard it is to understand reality, even when we limit it to purely physical events.
Any more questions, folks? More comments? There's quite a lively conversation going on there. And Brian has been giving a lot of the YouTube links to various things, like your talk on physical mediumship and on Asapia Palladino, as well as Jaher's Witch of Lime Street presentation for the one of the book expos and some other stuff. So I've been loading up on links to put into a chat log, a link doc to put into the classroom for the students. So very interesting conversation. Anything else, folks?
I just wanted to mention that here, this article that I published in 2003 is basically what I presented here today. This is a paper that appeared in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. And if you're interested in more details about what I was saying about the SPR and the and J.B. Ryan's program and the whole idea of how history deals with all these metaphysical claims, there is a lot more details there. If you're interested, I have copies PDF format that I can send.
I'm giving them the lexine.org link at the moment. I'm not sure if SPR is up to 2003. Is it in the database?
Yeah, that's in there.
Okay.
You have a few years after.
And a few years after. Okay. It's an older database. It looks a little 1990s, but it's got a lot of information from the journals of the field, and you can download for not a very expensive subscription. You can read and download things from the Journal of Parapsychology and the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research and some other journals and books that are in the collection of the SPR. So that's a good resource. They're still hoping to get some more money to revamp the database, but haven't done it as yet. So Alex is asking, what's your opinion about the Skoll report? And if you would first say what the Skoll report is for those who aren't aware of it.
Yeah. Well, that's really not one of my main areas. You know, Skoll report deals with kind of sense type phenomena and more of the physical type. You know, people that have seances, and then they get physical phenomena like raps and movements of the table, but sometimes they also get mental things. sometimes also has mental components. When we talk about raps or sounds that people hear, like someone hitting the table, sometimes those sounds are intelligent and answer questions and give information. So, these things can become complex. Uh, I think I cannot say that that much about this cold report. I think there were most probably there were real phenomena there. If they were coming from spirits, that I would not be sure to say. I think there are better cases to deal with if you want to to discuss the issue of survival. Well, the whole skull report is very much associated also with the phenomenon of cedar groups. And I think cedar groups is a great methodology. It's very difficult in terms of the dynamics and the control sometimes, but it's a great way of you have the people with the disposition and the patience sit down and develop phenomena. It's a good way to produce phenomena. And a lot of great phenomena has been produced, and a lot of it has never been reported. Secret groups is one methodology that if you for every few reports, like the skull report, appears there are many other groups that keep quiet and they don't report on what they have been doing and what they have been finding. So I'm sorry I cannot say anything more definitive, except that I would like to see more more studies on that.
I'm mentioning, I put up the link to the search for the Scholar Report on Science Encyclopedia. And Brian, if you could put up the link to Psychical Research Foundation, that would be great. Are there any other comments or questions that anybody has? Thanks, Stephen. Steve is saying he's as after this first discussion, I have a ton of learning to acquire on the field. I was just saying that that we learn. Morgan had commented that she learns a lot from these sessions, and I was saying that we do too, from both the presentations that are done, but also from the discussions that happen because of the presentations. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is so much information. No one can be an expert on everything. And when you listen to your colleagues and friends that are presenting, there is always, things to learn from them because they have experiences that we have not had. I find that frequently when I hear people like Steve Rowdy or any others presenting. He said that's why you always have to keep an open mind and a good attitude and then, before you make your final evaluation and your own putting together of all these facts, you need to listen and to be open to what other people say. There are times that you realize, well, what I was thinking, it was too simplistic, and it doesn't. And that's the value, I think, of a lot of these lectures and also reading widely in the field and being open to opposite points of views, even if you think that sometimes the people are unreasonable. And certainly there are people that are unreasonable. There's no question about it, I think. Well, that's also sometimes in the eye of the beholder. What may look to be too critical for someone is too naive for a different person. And we really need to make our own decisions based on what is out there, and that's the best that we can do, really.
Marla was just saying that you can hear the kitty cats. I assume that's Pinky trying to get your attention. We have two cats, Pinky and Spotty. I did not name them. Carlos named them, and then our friend Emily Kelly from DOPS felt that they needed to have more distinguished names. So technically, they're called Pinkerton and Spottiswood, but we call them Pinky and Spotty. And they love their daddy. That's all I got to say. And they're out there with him, so you're hearing them on the microphone.
Yeah,
Any other questions? Any other questions or comments? Antonio is asking, could psi be considered indirect evidence for survival if it means non-locality and therefore means mind is not equal to brain?
Yes, actually, some people have made that argument. I mean, that was one of the ideas of Myers and other people, is that, you know, if we have something that survives death, it has to be alive in us right now, and it has to be some type of non-physical aspect of our personality. And yeah, many people have made that argument. My next presentation, I'm going to be talking about an Italian researcher named Ernesto Bozzano. And that was one of the big points he was always making. He will call the ESP or psi from the living animistic. That's a really old term that is almost no longer being used. But he will say that animism implies spiritism. And that he means is that the actual ESP abilities of living persons suggest survival, because since he believed that ESP, you know, showed that non-physical processes, then if that's the case, it makes sense that there will be survival. And a lot of people will not go all that way. For example, J.B. Ryan, with his career, talk about ESP as a non-physical. I think in some of his books, such as his book The Reach of the Mind, or in a later book, The New World of the Mind, he will say that a kind of duality has been demonstrated because of the existence of ESP, meaning that there is a mind separate from the body, because if ESP can do all these things and ESP has no physical parameters, and we have to think of it as a non-physical property of living persons, then it makes sense to postulate the existence of a separate mind. That was J.B. Ryan's position. However, J.B. Ryan was never came out accepting survival from the findings of parapsychology. He was willing to say, yeah, in the living, that's kind of, there is a separate mind that is non-physical. But he never actually got there and said, yeah, and that mind survives physical death. He really never came to say that. Which for some people find it kind of strange, you know, that he never completed the reasoning process. But I think, you know, that's the thing. For a lot of people, that's the case. If there is something non-physical right now living in us, and we can do other kinds of psychic phenomena like telepathy, like, you know, we believe in a non-local mind and all that, it makes a lot of sense to say, yeah, and then what happens after you die? Well, will that thing be extinguished? If it's extinguished, then it was not that non-physical. Because if it depends on the physical, unless you argue that for its manifestation, it always needs a physical presence, which again, even spiritualists will agree, you know, that you need a medium. That is, it's very hard for a spirit to manifest without the assistance of living persons. And again, there are exceptions in this way of thinking. You know, a lot of it is kind of very fuzzy, because a lot of these concepts are not that well developed. But the short answer is yes. You know, that's a valid idea, and a lot of people have seen it like that. There is something in the living that is immaterial. It may imply survival of the.
Morgan is saying, I wonder if the slow progression that neurology is making towards the model of fundamental consciousness will end up being the major key in moving this forward. if it comes from that perspective and we rule out the brain as the generator, that's going to be a major movement forward.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that as we see the field of neurology and neurophysiology in general changing, if that happens, certainly that will be that will start affecting our thinking of how mind can be independent, and then the things that mind can do if you accept that it's independent. I think that will be very very important in science. And there are signs of that. You know, the book I mentioned, Irreducible Mind, is a big, powerful influence. But I think there's still a big separation between people, in parapsychology making those arguments and people that come from a long tradition of neurological work, people that deal with patients and like, that are very skeptical about the whole idea that mind can separate, because they will tell you, well, in my experience, if there is no brain, there is no consciousness. If there is some type of impairment, there is no possibility of a clear mind. And of course, they ignore some of things like the phenomenon of terminal lucidity that we are going to hear later in this series of lectures. Michael Nam is going to discuss that. That's very much directly relevant to neurology. Right. So, there still remains to be a lot of, I think, more fights and discussions for the neurological field to change. But if the change continues and it gets to that, certainly it will be a big step towards accepting ideas of survival. I will agree with
that. We're talking about how this is going to. Oops, I just spelled Morgan Friedman's last name incredibly wrong. Sorry about the typo, guys. We were talking about how complex things will get if people have to start looking at mind in a general way, not just us. How much more complex that would get if mainstream science headed in that direction as well. And then Morgan was suggesting that some of this reminds her of was it Morris Friedman's talk last year in the 2018 ParaMOOC. So I'll try to get that MP4 up there too, so people have access to that. And then the thought that came to me as we were talking about in the chat about complexity and complications is that it always makes me think about Occam's razor and the notion that whatever is a simpler explanation is probably the truth. And my reaction has always been, but nature is not simple. So why do we expect nature to be simple? Maybe for our understanding, it's simpler for us to fall on ideas that have fewer steps and fewer side caveats and fewer explanations needed for understanding a phenomena or its processes or whatever. That might be easier for all of us, but it doesn't seem to be reasonable in terms of the. And Padraig is saying quite a lot of time the Occam's razor approach is inclined to remove aspects of a topic to allow the simplest consideration to hold. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's like appealing to that forces you to kind of peel off very important aspects of something you're talking about in order to get to that simple explanation. And then unfortunately, in a lot of areas of science, all of those complexities get lost in the fog of time, and people start to say, oh, well, that was an idea they had in 1922 or in 1857, and we don't need to think about it. Well, maybe we do. I remember one SSE, Society for Scientific Exploration conference we went to back in the 1980s, And Brenda Dunn was giving a talk. I'm not sure now what the topic was, but one of the people in the audience got up and said, oh, well, that's somebody who wrote, last century, and that's science that was rejected. Why are we even talking about this? And her comment back was something like, well, but if we were wrong to drop it, then we should go back and take a look and see if with our new technology and our new understanding, there's actually something to be learned from these older older references and older thinkers and so on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the work that goes now is basically an attempt to remind science or have them consider the thing you have dropped the mind out of consideration too fast. There, and it's easy to do that as long as you ignore certain types of phenomena, which is what we are bringing up here. So yeah, I agree completely.
Any more questions or comments? If, on YouTube, there's a couple of guys, John Green and Hank Green, who are behind the Crash Course YouTube videos and tons of other things that happen on YouTube. And one of the things that I like about their work is they're always stressing complexity and the importance to have an open mind in the face of complexity, whether it's scientific complexity or social complexity. They're not pro necessarily some of our work, but they do when they try to attack it in SciShow and some of these other informational YouTube video series that they run. They do a pretty good job of being fair about things, and I think part of that is this notion that complexity is really important, and that even if we can't get 100% there in terms of our explanations, it's important to keep our minds open to what else might be impacting on whatever it is that we're studying or thinking about. So I love to see that, because it's kind of a millennial meme that comes out of the work of John Green and Hank Green on YouTube. Antonio is saying an anonymous author called Signs has an old and lovely book titled How to Speak with the Dead. Are there any modern good books about communicating with discarnate entities?
There are many books that are written by people that have had experiences or by mediums. And certainly I think a lot of that literature is serious and should be explored. It depends, what you want to do. If you want it to develop yourself or to understand how these things work, by personal description, I think a lot of those books can be valuable. Certainly, it's not necessarily that some of their interpretations are completely correct, just as interpretations of scientists and anyone else can be always questioned. But the whole idea of describing methods and approaches since the beginning of mediumship, at least not the beginnings, but at least since the 19th century, have been many mediums that have talked about the process of mediumship themselves. And Eileen Garrett wrote about that kind of in a later period. Mrs. Leonard also wrote about it, and there are currently books. If you go to Amazon, you can find a lot of different books about that, and it will be good if that's what you're interested in, to find one that is really based on personal experience, that is not only ideas, but it's a person that has gone through that and is analyzing their experiences, and so that then you can learn something about actual direct experience.
Let me go. Brian was saying in response to what we were talking about before, that reminiscent of the effects of the behaviorism movement as well, regarding the focus on simple cognitive aspects with little consideration of wider mind. And I think that's a good point to make too, because behaviorism is certainly, and classical conditioning are certainly aspects of psychological theory that are working still and appear still in different practical things like cognitive behavioral therapy and a lot of teaching techniques and so on. But certainly cognitive psychology and neuropsychology has moved on to this real, much more complex sort of soup of how they are attempting to understand the mind and the mind, although they call it the brain, and how they are trying to understand all of these aspects that we've got going, learning and all that stuff. So everything is kind of complexified in psychology from what Watson was trying to do back in the beginning of the 20th century with this kind of and Skinner, this narrowing in on only behavior. Anyway, this has been a really interesting conversation. We've been in a lot of directions. How the development of parapsychology really got kicked off by the whole movement. Carlos, the general course bibliography PowerPoint that we had up in the last MOOC, are there books there that would be relevant to this conversation? Should I put that PowerPoint up as well into the classroom for this course?
I think there should be something there that is relevant.
Okay, let me.
Don't remember.
I'll put the PowerPoint up as well, and then some of the other MP4s. Not all of this stuff is going to appear today. I will have the link thing available today, other presentations, and can certainly download Carlos's Palladino thing from YouTube and put that up there as well. Well, okay. Anything else anybody has to say? I think we've done a good job of extending the conversation, and Carlos's presentation was really wonderful, as always, very informative and full of all kinds of different ways to look at this point of view. I don't know, do you think it would be okay for me to download a copy of your SPR article and put that in the classroom as well, just for classroom use?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let me do that because
I have the PDF. I can give it.
Yeah, send me the PDF and I'll get that up in the classroom as well, because that's a really good article that kind of extends and gives you a more tangible. Well, I don't know. The recording is also tangible, but a tangible memory of what's gone on here.
And it has more specific information, because a lot of what I presented here, I had to really summarize and gloss over, and the article has a lot of references.
That's always important.
That I mentioned in more detail.
Yeah, Carlos is the king of references, if you haven't noticed. Well, let me go on to the next slide. I just wanted to let you know what's coming up on the schedule, which hopefully you've got your PDFs to help you in the class, live class list as well.
It's me again.
It's you again. Next Saturday, April 13th at noon Eastern, Carlos is going to be talking on European interest in the survival of death, the case of Ernesto Bozzano. And next to us, Eusebia Palladino, I think Ernesto Bozzano is Carlos's favorite character in the history of parapsychology. Would you say that's accurate? Yeah.
I think so.
And I have to say, I'm of Italian descent. So, I mean, I'm of also other things too, but my family was brought up to believe that we were Italian. And I have a feeling I got my foot in the door in terms of Carlos's interest.
A lot of these things, like the work of Bozzano, one of the things I'm interested in is to rescue all that from oblivion.
Yes,
a lot of people have forgotten about it, and Bozzano is a particular difficult one to study because most of his work at least 80% has never been translated into English. There are a few things here and there. So I always enjoy, finding these things and bringing them out, presenting the bibliography, and at least so that people know that this guy existed and he did all these different things. I enjoy doing that.
Well, and there's a lot to Bozzano too, as you're going to be hearing next Saturday. So Carlos has good reasons for for having him on his favorites list. And then Sunday, April 14th, we'll have Jan Holden talking about near-death experiences and the survival of physical death. And as I mentioned in the intro, after she's finished, I'll be putting up the MP4s of her presentations from a couple of years ago, which were really excellent as well. So thank you, everybody. We're glad that you came along today. The recording should be available in about 24 hours, if not sooner. I just should mention again that when you go to your live class list that's available on those 3 bars, the left-hand navigation, you will see that the recordings have moved over to the quote-unquote past tab. Everything that's upcoming will be under the upcoming and live tab, but as soon as they're completed, then they get moved over to the past tab, and that's where you'll find the recording. And of course, all of the links will stay the same, so your PDF of the full course links will also work to get you to the recording. And if it hasn't finished processing, it'll say that, so you'll be able to see that and go from there. So thank you, everybody. I've got a whole list of stuff here. I am sorry that we can't copy the entire chat, but I think we're going to be fine. The chat will be available in the recording as well. So hopefully, let's don't hesitate to get in touch with us. I'll put the emails in again. If you have any questions or comments, if you're having any problems with the course, or you want to suggest something or ask something, I was just checking to make sure that I spelled everything correctly. You can email either one of us during the week, and we'll get in touch. And I will be setting up the 2 new discussion forums later today. Yesterday, I kind of zoomed out and didn't do much of anything else. ParaMOOC wise, but I will be doing some more stuff today. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next Saturday at noon Eastern for Carlos's next talk. Thank you so much, you guys. Have a great rest of your weekend. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.